You know, while I was working on that 25 books back there, I couldn't help but notice that a lot of those books were written by monks. Did you notice that? You know, we like the contemplatives around here. I mean, I do. I figure I could probably make a rubber bracelet and put WWTAKD. What would Thomas à Kempis do? And I could sell a lot of them, right? I think we have some takers. But sometimes I feel like some of these great cloistered men are a little bit maybe exclusive. And I start to feel a little discouraged by some of the maybe an us versus them attitude that I read. For example, the cloud of unknowing, in the midst of all that great talk of mystery, feels sometimes a little high-handed about the great superiority of the contemplative life to the active life. It even issues a warning at the beginning about how this book is written for true contemplatives. And I know, because Chris Webb kept telling me that the author is a creature of his times, that such a warning was more to say, don't read this unless you are really serious about prayer. But still, I wonder, am I ever going to be anything close to what this guy considers a true contemplative? I mean, I don't live in a monastery. I'm not likely to ever do so. I'm not going to go live in a desert anytime soon. Because if I tried to go live in a desert and left my husband with our 2 sons, he would come and drag me back, I promise. He would find me. I live in a single-family home with a husband, 2 small boys, a miniature dachshund, and a fish. In the 21st century, and on the surface, it can be difficult to see sometimes beyond the obvious historical and theological implications, just what practical relevance there is in some of these books. But I am increasingly convinced that it is there. That even in the most lofty sounding of these contemplative books, these books written by these monks, lived many centuries before I was born, there is a tremendous amount of information to inform our day-to-day lives. So let's start today with Thomas à Kempis from my rubber bracelet that I'm definitely going to make. And his 15th century devotional masterpiece, The Imitation of Christ. This book is just a tiny bit anti-world. Have you noticed that? It was written by a monk for other monks, by a monk who is proud to say that he had only ventured outside the monastery walls twice. So there's a lot of discussion of contempt for the world and hating oneself, of being focused on the interior and not attuned to exterior things. But throughout the century, most of the people who have read this book have not been those in the cloister. As Richard mentioned that first night, it wasn't until the 20th century that people, just about every Christian around, wasn't reading that book. In some key ways, the life described here is not that different from most of ours. Kempis says there is nothing outside the monastery that is not within its doors. And that is really true for all of our communities, within our churches, within my little 21st century family. God is not confined to that monastery. And, there may be some times when I long for a peaceful life behind some monastery walls, where I can just focus on God. But you know what? I don't think those monks had that either. I just don't buy it that their lives were so pure of exterior things. They had to see their own medical needs. They were still probably annoyed by the way the other monk down the hall snored, or slurped their soup, or sang off key. If anything, reading Kempis's advice in that book about things like being patient and putting up with others' faults and weaknesses by keeping in mind our own flaws, avoiding gossip, avoiding empty chatter, and not opening our hearts to just anyone unless that person is really wise and reveres God. All of this serves to convince me that monasteries are really a whole like every community or family situation that I've ever lived in. And for both those living in cloistered communities and for the rest of us, we need to put God at the center of our lives, and we face some challenges in doing so. Now here's where Kempis's advice is so practical and helpful for anybody. His words of advice for cultivating humility. He tells us to see ourselves as God sees us, or try, and be mindful of our weaknesses and our failings, just like the cloud author. He also tells us not to take pride in our bodies, our abilities, or our possessions. All that stuff is surely as applicable to me, if not more, than any monk. As tempting as it might be to ignore the needs of our bodies because they can distract us from the life of the Spirit, Kempis doesn't tell us to do that. He urges us to take good care of ourselves so that we can do more for God.